Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews Saturday Conversation Show, an interview series where I talk to entertainment personalities, content creators, and filmmakers about their work and love of film. Today's guest is Staci Layne Wilson, a best-selling author and award-winning filmmaker and the creator of the Rock and Roll Nightmares book series and podcast, in which the world of rock, true crime, and horror come together in entertaining fashion. A child of rock royalty and survivor of the entertainment industry, Staci has blazed her own trail of success to create a legacy of words and images, which I believe is just going to keep going and going. Because Staci, you're such a prolific talent. It's such a joy to talk to you today, and I thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, well, thanks, Matt. I really am happy to be here, and it's so nice to meet you face to face, as it were.
Absolutely. I mean, face to face over, over many seas and such, but this is the technology we have now, and such a joy to be able to do something like this and talk to you because I was saying to you off air, I'm such a fan of your work. Not only do you just tap into and talk about the things that I'm interested in, films, horror, true crime, and such. I'm a big fan of creators that are incredibly prolific in their work, but able to put out quality that matches with the quantity. And I'm kind of curious in regards to yourself. You were first published when you were 12, which is like a remarkable feat. When did you first kind of get the knack for yourself of writing was something that you were good at? Was it something that you enjoy? Your mother was a writer, right? Is that something where you kind of picked up from her?
Absolutely, yeah, she was certainly my inspiration. She encouraged me to read and write at a much mature level than I probably should have been as a young kid. When I was 8 or 9, I was reading full-on Stephen King books and
Mm.
Hollywood Babylon and all those kind of just from her library, and also the classics. She liked Lewis Carroll, and she liked just like Charles Dickens and all that stuff. So I really got a great broad education, self-education. And when I was 12, it was a very long time ago when there was still gatekeeping to publishing. So it wasn't like it was self-published or anything. So it was kind of a feat. But to me, I kind of took it in stride because my mom was always being published. So it was just kind of normal in our household.
When it comes to film, I know you're a big fan of horror and such. Vincent Price movies, that was pretty much your jam, right? When you were a younger kid, is pretty much his stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And The Exorcist, because I'm a Gen Xer, an earlier Gen Xer. So when I was coming of age in the 80s and also a bit in the 70s, I was a kid in the 70s watching horror movies. And it was the era of the auteur and the satanic kind of, all those movies of The Omen and The Exorcist and
Mm.
Audrey Rose and, all that like really supernatural dark stuff. So that's what I kind of cut my teeth on. So that's always what I have been gravitated towards.
Is that where that lasting kind of like interest within like occult stories, horror stories and stuff, is that pretty much where it began during that time? Because I'm of the belief that once you start becoming like a creative, the stuff that you're kind of consuming at that time is always going to be your thing that you're always going to love. Like I remember when I first started like picking up guitar and stuff like that, the songs I was listening to back then are still the songs I'm listening to now. The movies I watched back then are still some of the favorites I have now as well. Is that the same with you?
Oh, absolutely. Although I am pretty adaptable, I like to try to keep up with things that are new and always keep myself informed on what's happening, not only in the world now, but in pop culture. So I'm not a diehard, person that goes back in time and won't watch a movie past 1980 or something like some people who are real historians.
Mm.
But yes, I feel like anything that you've picked up in your formative years, that's just in your brain, and that's something that you always gravitate toward.
Where did you watch your movies? Was the cinema kind of like the big thing for you and your family?
Well, it was actually a lot of television because
Mm.
we had the Elvira afternoon movies on Channel 11 in Los Angeles, where I grew up. So I got a lot of horror films actually in afternoon movies. A lot of the what was it? Don't Be Afraid of the Dark was one that really creeped me out when I was a little kid, and that I saw in the afternoon on TV. But also, I was allowed to stay awake late, so I could watch. things like when you talk about music, like Don Kirshner's rock concert or the Midnight Special, or those things that came on. Also, Saturday Night Live was something that I liked, and they would also spoof a lot of pop culture movies, rock music. So all
Mm.
that stuff kind of fed into my fuel.
And at that time, were you going to gigs as well, checking out concerts?
Pardon?
Were you going to concerts as well, checking out bands on stage?
Not as much when I was really young. My dad is a member of the Ventures, a founder of the Ventures. So I got to see him in concert a lot. And then through that, there were also opening acts and other bands that I could see. My sister took me to see Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show in the 70s when I was a real little kid. I always liked that song about being on the cover of the Rolling Stone. But I didn't start going to concerts on my own until the 80s. So I saw Fleetwood Mac, Billy Squire, remember him?
Of course, yep.
Yeah, Judas Priest, Deep Purple, all those bands. I like to go see them in stadiums, but when I was growing up in Hollywood, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, I don't know, it was the hair band era. So I got to see Motley Crue and Wasp and Poison and all those at the local nightclubs where it was smaller venues where you could get in with your fake ID.
I love that era of music. I grew up on it. So Motley Crue, Wasp, Rat, all those guys. That's my stuff.
Oh
Because my
yeah,
older
yeah,
brother,
Rats.
my older brother listened to the stuff. So I listened to the stuff as, but I was like a proxy kind of thing. And he took me to my first concert, which was the Kiss reunion tour back in 1996 when they put the
Oh
makeup back on.
wow.
Yeah, that was
That's
my first
fantastic. I was
concert.
just at Kiss World here in Las
Hmm.
Vegas, where I live now, and it's quite the spectacle. They have miniature golf where you can kind of shoot, like what is it, golfing on Gene Simmons' tongue. You have to get the
All
ball
right.
up. Yeah, it's wild, but yeah, I mean, I appreciate the glam metal and hair metal era more now than I did when it was actually happening, because I've always
Mm.
been a diehard 1970s music fan. So I love Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan's 1970s era. So that's still my favorite, but I'm much more nostalgic now about that era.
When it comes to your writing, did you find yourself developing a writing style as the years went on? I know with myself that when I first started writing, like even my reviews, so I've been doing this for, it'll be 19 years for myself this year of doing reviews and all that stuff.
Yeah, congrats.
The reviews I did back then, I don't know who wrote those because it just seems so different and it's just felt mostly like there's a primitive kind of infancy, like you're kind of finding your style, you're finding your pace and all that kind of stuff. Did you find yourself going through the same kind of transitions yourself when you came to your writing, starting from such a young age of 12 into say, I don't know, when your first novel, your first rock and roll nightmares book came out? I'm sure there's a long transition there
Oh,
of
there
finding your
certainly
style.
is. Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm a pretty adaptable person in my personality and how I do things. So, having a journalistic background and writing freelance for several different outlets, everything from the news to true crime to how to decorate your house. I mean, all these, like I would just take any writing gig. So I learned to be able to adapt to just about any style. And I don't really put a lot of conscious thought into it, but usually my writing has a thread of dark humor running through it.
How do you go about writing your books and in your stuff? Because I don't know what it is about me, but I usually do my drafts with pen and paper first. I don't know, it just flows better for me that way. I can't sit down and just type. I can't do it. How do you kind of do your work?
Oh, you and Clive Barker, you like to write in longhand first, right? No, I'm not
Hmm.
that old school. I was using a computer PC, home PC, like from the minute they came out. So if I
Mm.
could type it, I don't even do my grocery list on a piece of paper. I do it in my phone. So I'm very much about the technology, and I'm not a big outliner. I'm more of a just kind of have a basic idea of where I want the story to go and sort of follow the muse. That's for fiction, of course. For nonfiction, there's a lot of research involved in making sure that you can still tell a compelling story, but stick to the facts.
With yourself being such a prolific writer as well, what kind of tips can you give to someone like me? Who's sometimes I find myself struggling to, like, I have my phases where I can do okay, but then there'll be a long stretch where I'm not writing. Sometimes I get a little anxious. Sometimes I feel like I'm not prepared. What kind of tips can you give to someone, any writers out there who might find themselves not being able to be as prolific as they hope they could be?
I would say even when you're not actually in the act of writing, you're still absorbing, you're still learning, you're still observing. So none of that time is wasted, even if you're reading other books to kind of get inspired to get into your own writing. I never feel that time is wasted. So whatever you're doing, if you can kind of be aware of things around you, you can incorporate that into your writing later, or even take little notes. I have little bits of dialogue or titles that I want to use saved. So I have a bunch of research information that's in sort of a digital filing cabinet that I can go to later. And sometimes just going through those things will inspire me to start writing again. But I have been a full-time writer, and that's pretty much my sole mode of income. So if I'm not writing, I'm not eating, basically. So that's my motivation. I got to pay the bills.
When
And
it comes to the
it's a job, but it's also a passion.
Yes, I mean, and you got to have that passion there, and I imagine as well. And just following your Facebook page, you post a lot about different books you have in your library. How essential is reading to the writing process as well?
Oh, I think it is essential, absolutely. And also not just reading within your genre, but
Mm,
being a well-rounded reader. I don't gravitate toward fiction, but I try to incorporate it into my sort of my reading to-dos, because I learn a lot from reading different types of fiction. There are some that I just don't like and don't want to spend my time on, like say science fiction or romance or something like that. But I
mhm.
like thrillers, I like contemporary fiction, I like historical fiction, I love horror, of course. But my main sort of love of reading is definitely nonfiction. I love biographies, I love autobiographies, I like history, I like sociology. So I think all of those things will filter into my sort of my consciousness and will manifest through anything that I write, whether it's horror or it's nonfiction. So I
Excellent.
think it's important to be well informed.
Yeah, I'm trying my best now to try to put some time, more time into reading, because I find sometimes I'm working so much that I don't have put the time in. And sometimes you got to, like you said, you got to absorb everything, and absorbing other people's words, I think is very essential.
Mhm. And audiobooks, if you don't have time to sit and read, I also get a lot of my reading done through audiobooks, whether I'm driving or doing housework or taking a walk or at the gym, I'm usually listening to a book.
When it comes to the topics that you talk about, it's so interesting to me because, like I said before, the stuff that you write and stuff that you talk about in Rock and Roll Nightmares podcast is stuff that I'm a big fan of. And I just had a question, like just a query in regards to talking to you as I considered like an expert in the field of like true crime and rock and roll, how these kind of worlds mesh together. Would it be fair to say that the 1960s was the decade where a lot of those things kind of came into fruition, especially in regards to more kind of the occult aspects of horror and rock and roll and how they kind of came together? Because I know there's older stories where, just say, Robert Johnson meeting the devil at the crossroads and such, but it seems to me the 1960s, especially with Aleister Crowley and Charles Manson and all these kind of influences, and the almost kind of like the integration they had with certain rock figures, whether it be Beach Boys or guys from Led Zeppelin or what have you. That to me, that's almost kind of like a ground zero where a lot of that kind of stuff happened. Would that be an accurate kind of description of those worlds kind of coming together in the in kind of like in blossoming in so to speak?
Yeah, I would say that that was the springboard for the 70s, which I think was more occult obsessed even than the 60s, although the 60s definitely had the elements of astrology and magic and mind and expansion and acid and all of that. I mean, it was kind of the era of breaking free. It was the advent of the pill for women in the US. And it really gave people a lot more agency, not only with their bodies, but with their minds. So I would say that was definitely the springboard, although it was a more optimistic era, I would say, than the 70s, which were fairly dark, at least, at least here where I grew up in the US.
I imagine as well, considering something we haven't really touched on was the advance of new technologies, TV in the 70s, for example, and then images of the Vietnam War and all that kind of other stuff, and images of civil rights protests, riots, and stuff like that would have definitely had an effect on, say, songwriters and filmmakers and how they put their stuff out there.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Yeah, there was such a groundswell of new things, whether it was ideas or technology in that era. I would say from 65 to 75 was an amazing time in human history and music and television and you name it.
I want to move over to a game I like to play called Choose Between Two. Essentially, I'm going to give you a choice between two things. You're going to choose one, and you're just going to, just elaborate on it and talk about why you want to choose it. Are you ready to play?
I guess I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
All right. So I know you're a big fan of Led Zeppelin. So I was going to put them in this, but I know your choice is going to be Led Zeppelin. So I'm going to go for two other great 1970s hard rock bands. Okay, so the choice is Black Sabbath or Deep Purple.
Oh, Black Sabbath.
What is
I
it
think
about
that.
that? Go ahead.
Oh, I like the different. You mean in the 70s, like they had a couple different singers. They had Ozzy and they had Ronnie James Dio, and yeah, I like that heavy, sludgy sound. Although Deep Purple certainly had that too, but I don't know as many of their songs as I do Black Sabbath.
Love Black Sabbath. Is one of my favorite bands of all time. You spoke before about how you are the daughter of the late great Don Wilson, rhythm guitarist, primary songwriter of The Ventures. The Ventures had like 250 albums, kind of some really obscure ones there. So I'm going to make you choose between two: The Ventures disco album or The Ventures Christmas album.
Oh goodness. Well, um, I'm gonna have to say the Christmas album because it comes out every December here, and I love it because I hate Christmas music normally, but
Right.
they don't have any lyrics, so it's all just kind of guitar-driven instrumentals, which I can tolerate that.
Yes, and I imagine I used to work in retail, so when Christmas hit,
Oh,
the Mariah Carey Christmas album was on 24/7, and I
oh
I
my
I
God.
can't listen to any of those songs anymore. I
I
wish I
can't
knew
believe
there
you're
was.
still here. You didn't spontaneously combust.
It was close a couple times. I had a few fringes. I'm telling you. I wish I knew the Avengers Christmas album was around. I will search for it and put that on instead.
Oh, you're
I
gonna
assure
like
you of
it.
that. Next one, physical media or streaming. Now, this can count for both film and for music as well.
Well, I I don't know. Someone might take away my cinephile card, but I'm gonna say streaming because I don't have a lot of room for all that stuff. Although I do have a kind of a bookshelf full of physical media that of my favorite movies that aren't always streaming. I love old Italian giallo films, and I love old film noir and things like that that you can't always find streaming. But I like the convenience of streaming, and most of my music is in my phone. I don't even have any vinyl.
Ah, interesting. Very cool. Last one. You're at the cinema, you've got to sit down and watch a movie. What's your go-to? Popcorn or candy?
Popcorn.
Do you have a favorite type of flavoring or method of popcorn that you like to consume?
I'm always watching my weight, so no, plain.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. So I want to talk about your filmmaking career as well. I watched, when was it? A week ago, your documentary, the Ventures documentary, which I absolutely love because number one, I love when I can watch documentaries like that, so I can just get into bands that maybe I did not know of before, or I knew of and I didn't know who it was, and I was like, oh my God, all these songs associated with this one band, and then I'll read into it and the influence that your father's band had everyone from Eddie Van Halen and onwards. I mean, John Fogerty was in your documentary, just fantastic. When it came to that documentary, especially. What was it like delving into your father's kind of music, his discography, and the influence that his music had? I mean, is that something that you wanted to do for a while, or was that something that came along kind of like later on during that time of your life?
Well, it did come along later on because in all the years that the Ventures were together, starting in 1959, which is really impressive that they're still going in a different iteration without any of the original band members, but that no one had ever made a documentary about them before, which is just mind blowing. And my dad and my brother both were trying to get something off the ground, but the people could be so flaky and, oh, yeah, we're going to do it. Or, we're trying to raise money or whatever, but it never came to fruition. And since I had made some feature films, narrative, never a documentary, I thought, oh, okay, I can do this. And it turns out I can, but it was very, very difficult, much harder than making a narrative film. But I'm really glad that I did because my dad got to see it before he passed away, and he was really proud of me, and he loved the movie, and he was really satisfied with it. So that makes me feel really good. It's kind of a gift to my dad.
I always ask documentary filmmakers or anyone who even attempted to do a documentary a couple of things. First off, the process of the interviews. Yourself, you've had experience as an interviewer, red carpet interviews, etc. When you do interviews for the Ventures documentary, how do you like to approach them? How do you, you're talking to some really big names here. What's it like trying to get schedules together, the logistics of it? I'm sure it would have been a kind of both a frustrating but also awesome experience at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there were definitely ups and downs with gathering and amassing such an incredibly vast amount of different people and in different situations too. With Marky Ramone, I just happened to be walking by I think it was a horror convention. It might have been Monster Palooza, and he was there, and I knew that he was a fan, so I just grabbed my phone and like, would you say a few words? But then there was other interviews that were much more planned and practiced, and we had lighting and we had a real camera and the whole deal. So it's kind of a mishmash of different situations, which if I had unlimited amounts of money and time, it would have been great to have a studio and have everything look the same. So we have many different environments, but I still think it came together well, and it kind of shows people in their own environments. I was lucky enough to be able to go to John Fogerty's house and interview him there in his music studio. And so overall, I think that definitely we're able to kind of capture the essence of the interviewee rather than having a cohesive look.
The other thing I always like to ask is about assembling archive footage. What was it like trying to sift through all the different types of TV appearances, concerts, etc.? I'm sure that would have been a full-time job in its own.
It certainly was. I kind of did the first pass at finding things. I went to the fan base because they have some incredibly loyal and sort of rabid fans, if you will, who have everything and know everything. So they were a great help to me. And then after that, fortunately, I had an incredibly talented and intuitive editor, Nina Hurton, who really, I could not have done this without her. I mean, she and I just worked together so well that I've been working with her ever since. In fact, she's cutting my latest horror movie right now. And she's incredible because not only is she a musician and an editor and an animator and just
Mm.
an all-around great person. She's fantastic to work with. So she did a lot of the sort of the she knew how to place the music, whereas I think maybe a non-musician wouldn't have had that same ear as well as a great eye. And then she also did the animations for the recreations in the documentary.
Speaking of the music, when I talk to filmmakers about whenever they do a documentary on any type of musician, even if they are close friends with the band and or the subject that they're doing it on, a lot of times getting copyright for like music and such could be like a real pain there. Did you find yourself when you're trying to get copyright for Ventures music that was actually quite a difficulty, or having your father, being the founding member and such, does that ease the wheels, so to speak?
Well, it was a little bit of both because, on the one hand, their most iconic songs that were recorded in the 60s and early 70s were written by other composers. So there's
Mm,
that other part of the music rights, and they were controlled by Sony Music. So they don't care who I am. They
mm,
want tens of thousands of dollars for each song. So I had to go with the fair use angle on that and just play a few seconds of the song as long as it was in conjunction with what someone was saying about that song. So I could do that. And then on the other side of that, I had a lot of surf fans who were huge fans of the Ventures. So they were able to do kind of sound alikes for the background music that is not front and center. And then my composer, Michael Trapp, he did the score, which is just the sort of here and there. And then on top of that, the Ventures recorded a lot of original songs in the 80s that maybe aren't so famous, but I was able to get those because they were owned and controlled by the Ventures now.
mhm.
So I kind of was able to cobble together many different puzzle pieces to get the right sound.
Well, it's a great documentary. I very much enjoy it. And my wife sat down with me and she's like, "What are you watching?" Well, I'm watching this documentary about this band called Adventures. I'm going to be interviewing the daughter of the guitarist. She's like, "Oh, okay." She's watching. She's like, "Oh, I know that song, and I know that song, and I know that song." I was like, "Yes, I think we're going to know a lot of their songs because they're fantastic band. And it's great, and it is great that even though there's no founding members, of course, a lot of them have passed away. That there's still a group out there, kind of like keeping that venture spirit alive, and I think that's really cool as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, it really is a spirit and a feeling of the 60s, which I think is makes people feel good, and it's a nice way to kind of celebrate that era. And because it makes you think of surfing and the
Mm.
California sun and everything, even though they were from the Pacific Northwest where it was cloudy, rained all the time, and nobody surfed. So they really made something out of their sound.
Well, it's like that whole thing about the Beach Boys too, is like suppose like they made beach music. And of course they were highly influenced by the Ventures as well, but it's like they were like they didn't go to the beach, they weren't that thing. But yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it?
It is.
When it comes to your narrative films, whether it be your shorts or your feature films, when you get an idea to do a film, does it ever conflict with maybe whether you wanted to make it into a book or a film? Do you know when you get get those creative juices flowing, you have an idea for a story, do you know one will work for one medium more than the other? And if so, how do you kind of differentiate the two to where one story can work for, a film as opposed to a book?
Well, when I first started getting into filmmaking, my first feature film was Cabaret of the Dead, or AKA Fetish Factory. So I was just sort of a hired hand to write and direct that. So it wasn't really my idea per se. It was the producer. He had an idea that he kind of wanted these burlesque dancers, 60s style, the Betty Page look. So I came up with the fine details, but that was something that I was just hired to do. But then later on, the rights reverted to me. So I was able to actually do a novelization. I don't know if you've seen this, but I have it here if you want to. This is
Yes. Yep.
the book. Yeah. So we had an extremely low budget for the film. And so I wasn't really able to do a lot of the things that I would have liked to have done. So the book kind of expands the world and lets me get into things that would have cost a lot of money for the movie. But it was really fun to bring these characters back and to be able to explore them a little bit more, because I'm really partial to that whole kind of playground of the burlesque world and the zombies and Los Angeles and just all that was really fun. So it's really hard to say, because most of the time when I direct something, I'm hired to do something on another person's idea. So the only time I've really done something that was sort of my creation from the beginning was The Second Age of Aquarius, which is based on a short story by myself and my writing partner, Darren Gordon Smith, who also wrote the film Repo, the genetic opera. So he and I have been friends for many years, and we just love this idea of the rock star who comes back from the 60s. He's kind of resurrected as an avatar, or even a kind of an AI hologram now. And he's sentient, so he remembers his life in the 60s. So that was really a fun idea to play with. And we decided that we could probably make it pretty cheaply because it all takes place inside an apartment. He can't leave the confines of the apartment for certain reasons. As a hologram, he can't go out in the world. So it was really fun to do that. And we found an amazing cast and shot it in 5 days. So it's just kind of, it could go either way. It could either start with a short story or a book, or the movie can turn into a book. And I like that. I love flexibility.
And I think it's great as well how, like, especially when it came to like Cabaret of the Dead, you can actually use one medium to like jumpstart a story that can get expanded into another one. And I think that's really great. It's something that you kind of do with the Rock and Roll Nightmares as well, in regards to the podcast and the books as well. And yeah, I think it's a great time to be able to kind of put a lot of like kind of fingers in a lot of pies and put stuff out there over the one kind of orbits of one kind of creative idea.
Well, there are so many rock docs now. It's quite popular on sort of episodic TV. You know, you've got these documentaries, 3, 4 parts about hair metal or yacht rock. So I'm hoping to connect with a producer who can help me get the Rock and Roll Nightmares book series either for the nonfiction aspect as a documentary, or a lot of the short stories, which are horror short stories, would be fun as sort of a Black Mirror, Tales from the Crypt style, you know, maybe an anthology. So I'm looking into that.
When it came to Second Age of Aquarius, you're talking just now about the, you know, this the 60s icon resurrected as like a hologram kind of a deal. We're in a very interesting time. We're kind of venturing into new technologies again. This time we're talking about AI, like artificial intelligence, and the impacts that can have on creatives, writers, filmmakers, musicians. How do you kind of foresee the kind of like the upcoming AI kind of I don't know what you could call it. I don't know if you call it a revolution. I hope it's not a revolution, but do you see it as something, as a tool that can be used and used well to the disposal of writers and filmmakers, or do you see it as something that could harm creatives? Because I don't know about you, when it comes to sometimes some of the feature freelance stuff that I do, I find that not only am I competing against other writers and sometimes other writers from a younger demographic, but there's probably a good chance I'm competing against some AI bot somewhere who's writing up something so that the publisher doesn't have to pay, you know, whatever per word to some writer. So it's kind of it can be a scary kind of phase coming up soon for a lot of people, I think.
Oh, it's definitely a double-edged sword. But like I said, I've always been a technology embracing, forward thinking person who tries to use these things as tools to spark my own creativity and to further my own ideas in a more efficient way. So maybe I would be using it for good, but I can't control people who are using it for evil. So I try not to worry about it too much because there's really nothing you can do as an individual. At least I don't think so. So I just try to keep an open mind about it and try to, maybe use it as a tool for headlines or to spark ideas for titles or subtitles or the SEO or the kind of stuff that I hate doing, like cover
Mm.
letters. It's great for things like that where I can tell it, what I want it to say, and then I can go through, or you can even teach it to write like you can feed your own writing in there. But I've just played with it a little bit. It's certainly not something that I, at this stage in my writing career, need to rely on to write entire books or articles or anything like that. So I think it's here. There's nothing we can do about it. So just try to see if you can use it to your advantage, and if not, then ignore it.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. I want to move on to another game now, rapid fire questions. Just throw some questions to you. Give me the first kind of idea pops into your brain, and then you can elaborate on that as well. Are you ready to play?
I hope so.
All right, first one. If you could direct a rock biopic on any rock star, who would it be?
Jimmy Page.
Nice. Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated that we just had that Led Zeppelin documentary came out earlier this year. But when it comes to telling the Led Zeppelin story and kind of like in a narrative kind of film thing, that hasn't been done yet. That's very interesting, isn't
That
it?
has not, no. I think it would be interesting because they're so hit and miss. For instance, I love The Dirt that
Mm,
Netflix did. Motley Crue. I watched it about 4 times and it's so much fun. The Bohemian Rhapsody was fun. I'm Not There is probably one of my very favorite rock movies. I think Todd Haynes did an amazing job capturing the
amazing.
mystique of Bob Dylan,
Mm.
much better than what's the new one called?
I forgot the name of it. I
I can't
haven't even
remember.
seen it.
But
And the
Timothy
Timothy
Chalamet,
Chalamet, yes, exactly. Yeah.
just a standard biopic, which I
Yeah.
think Bob Dylan certainly deserves the more fantasy treatment that Todd Haynes gave him. But anyway, I think Jimmy Page would be great for visuals because he was such a beautiful dresser, and he just had that great look, and his love of the dark places like Boleskine House. He owned
Mm.
Aleister Crowley's house. So all that stuff would be fun to put into like that kind of 70s black magic
That sounds like
milieu.
it. I think that would be a great idea too. Which rock star would you love to interview, whether they be with us now or passed on to the other world?
Let's see. Jim Morrison, I think he would be very interesting to interview as long as he wasn't too high or drunk.
As long as it was
I guess you
coherent,
gotta
yes.
catch him early in the morning. But
Yes.
he seemed to have a lot of very interesting ideas, and he was quite eloquent when he wanted to be.
Yes. What did you think of the Doors movie, by the way, Val Kilmer, Oliver
Oh,
Stone?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I saw it when it first came out. Oliver Stone certainly took a lot of artistic license, I guess,
Yeah.
with the story. I know that Ray Manzarek absolutely hated it. In fact, in his book, like he's like every other page is how much he hates Oliver Stone in his book, which is quite distracting. But yeah, Ray was a cool guy. I got to interview him a few times.
If there was a biopic done on the Ventures, who would you like to see play your dad in the movie?
Oh, that's a good question. Who would be good as my dad? Gee, that's a tough one.
I have a
Who
few
are,
ideas.
yeah, give me some ideas.
I think a younger Jeremy Renner would be interesting.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Maybe even a younger Barry Pepper as well would be interesting. But I can't think of any contemporary actors right now, but those were the two that kind of pop into my head when I was watching your documentary.
Yeah, like who now could play him? I don't know. My dad had a pretty unique look. He didn't really look like anybody else, but
Hmm.
yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I'm gonna have to draw a blank there.
Hopefully one day it can happen.
That would be
What's
amazing.
it would I think so. And well deserved as well. Scariest horror movie.
Scariest. You know, I have to say that the psychological aspects of The Shining
Hmm.
still intrigue me. In fact, I recently rewatched that on 4K. I've seen it countless times. I couldn't even tell you how many. I know that Stephen King was not a fan of the Stanley Kubrick version, but I love it just because it's so atmospheric and so beautifully shot. And, it's kind of over the top and yet frightening. Um, I think The Autopsy of Jane Doe was one of the
Ah,
more scary movies that I saw, though, because you imagine yourself in that sort of isolated atmosphere. Yeah, I don't find a lot of horror movies scary anymore, although I still really enjoy them. But yeah, I'd have to say The Shining is probably my go-to when I want to get into that kind of spooky atmosphere.
last one. Pineapple on pizza. Yes or no?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Thin crust.
What's the
Yeah,
pizza
from
situation like
California,
in?
remember?
Yes, yes, exactly. What's a pizza situation like in Nevada as compared to California?
It's pretty amazing. Las Vegas has just about every kind of food you could possibly imagine.
Hmm.
Well, of course, all the top chefs come here to open up restaurants, but even beyond the strip, there is all different kinds of foods, and pizza is a pretty major staple here.
In this last stretch here, I just want to talk about Rock and Roll Nightmares. It started off as a book series. Now you have the podcast as well. Um, the idea's always kind of been there in regards to rock and roll, horror, all the different aspects of it are called. There's so much tragedy in rock and roll as well. Like the 27, like in book one that we got here, you talk about the 27 Club and other stuff as well. But there's like how many volumes now? 12 volumes
There
of it,
are,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, and there's I think there's even then after 12 volumes, there's still untapped kind of territory you can still
Oh
kind of
yeah,
go
I have
into as
so many
well.
ideas. Yeah.
So when you first like started to put this stuff together, even though they're like it's all there in the ether. It's all kind of connected. No one really kind of put it together yet. And like you're the first kind of person that I know of, which is why I love the book so much, is where it's like, finally someone gets it and put it together, and this is something you can really make something cool out of. So what was it like for you kind of thinking of the idea? And were you kind of surprised that other people weren't really kind of tapping into these kind of very, just an organic kind of connection between all these different elements?
Absolutely. I came up with the idea because as a reader, I couldn't find anything like that.
Hmm.
I was kind of looking for, in the nonfiction side, I was looking for sort of a Hollywood Babylon meets Rolling Stone magazine. So I couldn't find anything like that. You could find different articles online and you could spend a lot of time going to dozens of websites, but there's nothing really all put together. I'm not going to say, nothing. There are certainly a few books here and there, but there's not a cohesive series like what I've put together. And also, as a lover of short stories and fiction, I thought it would be fun to kind of cover a lot of different ground. And I even have a book called Rock Tales, which is,
Hmm.
kind of cool, spooky, different cocktail and mocktail recipes that are um, some of my favorites that I've concocted, and also from different rock musicians who contributed their ideas. And that was really fun to do. So there's just about something for everybody with these. That particular book, I give the profits to the Sweet Relief Musicians Fund, because I feel like, you're putting a book out about alcohol. You should try
Hmm.
to kind of give back a little bit because so many rockers have certainly fallen down the rehab rabbit hole. So yeah, I mean, it's just like there's an endless, I guess, source of inspiration. There's so many different ways that I can take this series, and it's fun and it's exciting. And I can highlight other writers that I like because for the fiction collection, I have quite a few guest writers who
When it comes
do,
when
and I pay them all, by the way. It's not just a one-way street.
What was it for you? What was it like for you foraying into the podcast world with the Rock and Roll Nightmares podcast? I mean, for people who don't know, it's a really fantastic podcast because you are talking to other authors about their own books and other people about stories in this world. What was it like for you, kind of going into that kind of world at first? Was it kind of like jumping in the deep end? You kind of had to find your feet there for a while, or excuse me, did you find because you're so open to adapting to new technologies, as you said before, there was something that came across a little easier for you?
Well, this is not my first podcast. I have done others. Well, I've hosted talk shows that were kind of podcasts. They were kind of streaming TV shows about horror movies. I did that in the mid 2000, I guess like 2010, 2011. And then after that, I had a podcast through Dread Central that I co-hosted with Vanessa Gomez, talking about horror movies. So mostly horror movie podcasts I've done, but I've never taken the reins on one all by myself. I did it mainly to, first of all, the idea was a little bit self-serving to maybe give podcast listeners a heads up on my books.
Hmm.
But this became a great way to help put the spotlight on authors because there aren't really that many book podcasts. There's a lot of rock music podcasts, but they don't focus on authors that much. Although I have interviewed quite a few musicians as well. It's kind of a in that playground of different aspects of the Rock and Roll Nightmares world. So I talk to authors of fiction, authors of biographies, authors of autobiographies, but I also talk to musicians about their new albums. I talk to documentarians. I have the directors of the new Led Zeppelin documentary on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. So anything that kind of fits in there, is fair game for the podcast. I'm on season 12 now, and it's quite a lot. I don't
Congratulations.
monetize the podcast at all, so I don't get paid for my time. But I kind of really enjoy connecting with people and chatting with them, and I love to celebrate creativity and gumption.
And that's like why I'm doing this show as well, because number one, I love I love talking to creatives because I find that it's incredibly inspiring, especially talking to like writers like yourself, where I can just, ask some questions and try to, try to get some methods going on my way so I can get some more work done. And especially with your work and just your output of work, it's incredibly inspiring. Is there any stories you've come across, like rock and roll kind of stories that maybe tap into really dark stuff that kind of freaked you out more than others? Because for me, the stuff that always freaked me out, one of the early books I've read that kind of touched on both of these worlds was the whole stuff in the 90s with the Norwegian kind of black metal kind of scene over there and all the church burns and stuff. That was like when I was a teen, when I read that kind of stuff, there was a book called Lords of Chaos that came out, I think, in the 90s. And I read that as a Catholic boy, reading that kind of stuff is stuff that really kind of freaked me out and saw this really dark, extreme side of like the heavy metal genre. And still to this day, I still find it incredibly strange and just really perplexing how like people can just how music can have that kind of effect on people, or vice versa, how that kind of people can have effect on music. Is there anything that kind of freaked you
Yeah, I
out in
think
any
it's
any
the
kind of way?
latter. I think, yeah, a lot of people who are disturbed may go into music and kind of twist it to their own
Yeah.
dark means. Like you said, the Lords of Chaos, that's a one that's just really still a jaw dropper, still stunning. I don't know if you saw the film version with
I
Kieran
did.
Culkin. I
Mm,
thought that was very well done. I've seen
me too.
that 2 or 3 times. It's
Mm,
amazing. Yeah, those things are certainly disturbing. There's another story about, I can't remember the girl's name now because it's been a couple of years since I wrote the book, but these teenage boys who wanted to be rock stars, they thought that murdering a virgin would give them
mm,
power of some kind. Of course, it didn't. They're all in jail now. But they tortured this poor girl, and it was a really hard to read those details. There was also the story of Phil Spector,
mm.
who murdered Lana Clarkson. Um, That was a tough one too, because when I write these books, the true crime aspect of it, I try to immerse myself in as many details as I can. So, I read autopsies, I look at crime scene photos because I want to be able to write about it as accurately as I possibly can. So that's tough. I mean, it's just so sad to see, this poor woman, Lana Clarkson, just her teeth blown out and, her teeth are all over the floor. And you just look at Phil Spector's behavior after that happened. And it's just kind of disgusting. He got married to a much younger woman while he was on trial, and she was making fun of Lana and laughing at her in the courtroom. And
Mm.
just like these people are so cold and black-hearted, it's really kind of discouraging when you think about how some of these people can react after they've committed such a horrific crime. There's really no remorse. So I also find the psychological aspects very interesting. What could drive a talented person like, say, Jimmy Page to get into heroin,
Mm.
and how does that hook somebody psychologically? So I learn a lot, and I hope that the books are not only entertaining, but also educational. So I try to kind of bring a levity to some places where it's appropriate, where the book is still kind of fun to read, but you're also not holding back on any of the darker details.
Well, like I said, I'm a big fan of your work. I'm a big fan of Rock and Roll Nightmares, both the podcast and the novels as well. And for everyone out there listening, you can go to stacilaynewilson.com. It's a official website for Staci Layne Wilson. It's got everything on there regarding her books, her movies, her podcast, everything, her Substack as well. Make sure you guys get on there and support Staci out. And in the show notes, I'm going to have links to everything down there, to make sure that Staci, a lot of people get out there and grab your books and listen to your work, because yeah, it's like I'm a big fan, and it's been such a
Ah,
pleasure to
thank
be
you,
able to
Matt.
talk to you today. It's I've learned so much talking to you, and yeah, thank you so very much for your time. And I think I heard you mention that your editor's working on one of your a new horror movie that's coming out soon. Do you have any news in regards to that?
Soon, I don't know. It's been in the editing process for a while, but yeah, it's called Dark House of the Mannequins, and it's kind of a dark comedy about a woman who shares her house with sentient and murderous mannequins. So that should be out sometime this year, though.
Mannequins freak me out. I don't know if you ever seen those Hill House movies. They always appear in those ones. They freak me out all the time. But yeah, I got to say, when that comes out, I'd love to talk to you again about the movie
Oh,
when it
sounds
does,
good.
because it's been a pleasure. And again, thank you so very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.